I'm a big believer that if you're not all in, if you don't burn the ships, if you've got a plan B, and especially if that plan B is sort of like a quote unquote easy way out, you're going to end up defaulting to that when times get hard. Because the truth of the matter is, anything that you want to do, again, whether it's being a real estate developer, doing a podcast, well, whatever, it's going to be hard, especially at the beginning, and you're probably going to fail. So I think that if you really want to be successful, you got to put yourself in the position where you have no choice but to be successful. You have no other way out.
Matt, thanks so much for joining me on today's episode of Business Innovators. I really I'd appreciate you coming on. And I wanted to start I love your story because I love self-made stories, basically. And I wanted to just start and for you to talk about growing up. And when you were growing up, were there influences in your life that, were things that you thought at the time that one day you would become this successful entrepreneur?
Yeah, and thanks for having me, Ralph, by the way. It's a pleasure. It's interesting. The way I grew up, I mean, my parents came here as immigrants from the former Soviet Union. I mean, we're always fine. We always had food on the table, but we never really, my dad fixed watches for a living, and my mom, was a manicurist, right? So you can kind of get a sense of the economic profile growing up, right? And it was one of those things like, yeah, did I have Transformers growing up? Sure, but I could never get Optimus Prime or Megatron, right? So like years later, I'm actually sitting in my office, I'm staring at them right now, but years later, when I could afford it, I went back and spent like $3,000 and bought them, bought an Optimus and a Megatron, like unboxed, right? Like, so growing up, I didn't really, it was an interesting thing because I wasn't surrounded by, and I want to choose my words carefully because look, I look at my dad as a success. He always had a job. He always put food on the table for us, but I was never surrounded by like true entrepreneurial success at the levels that like I've seen and what's really possible out there. So growing up, I never really even knew what was possible. Like there were times, and I can remember in my life where I used to think like, my God, if one day I could make like 80 grand a year, I'm set for fucking life. Right. And that was like the ceiling. That was like, not, I wasn't even sure if that was achievable. Right. And that was like, oh my God, that would be, I was, I'm home free. And that's a function of just what I was surrounded by. I wasn't surrounded by anyone that made that. So that wasn't a reality for me, and so growing up, you know, it was, it's an interesting thing because there was always a feeling in the pit of my stomach. It's even hard to explain that I knew I was like, I could do more. I was meant for more, but I never really fully understood what that was. you know,
I totally relate and have so much respect, for your parents, especially as immigrants. I have a situation, it wasn't my parents, my grandparents. My grandfather was a house painter, and coming over here, really setting the table for more opportunity, the beauty of this country. But it sounds to me that you saw how hard your father was working, how hard your mother worked. Is that where your drive came from? Was that part of really, that built you?
I guess partly, I will say this, my dad, he's the type of person that never gave up. Like there's a great story from growing up where when I was maybe my youngest son's age. Maybe I was he's 9. Maybe I was 10 or 11 years old. I came home one day. My dad was sitting on the couch, and he had a bunch of money in his hands, and he was counting money. And it, and I looked at my mom. And I was like, my dad's home really early from work. Like I was home from school, and she's like, well, he lost his job today. And I was like, okay. And I didn't fully, it took years later, I processed what had actually happened. He was sitting on the couch counting all the money that we had to figure out how much time he had to find a new job and how much like food and rent he can, what he could spread out for that. Right. And by the way, within a couple of days, he had a new job and we were fine. We were always fine. So from that perspective, like, I feel like I always saw in my dad, like a resilience that like, it's always going to be okay. Like he's always going to figure it out, which he did. Um, but there was also a part of me, and I still have it, that it kind of created a little bit of a chip on my shoulder where I never wanted to just be in that position. And so I think it's more that I just hated that situation. And there are other situations that, sort of like that over the years. I think it was more that drove me. I just hated the being poor. I think is the best way to say it. Just fucking hated it. That was a big, big driver for me. And even to this day, I have a chip on my shoulder. Still today, it drives my wife fucking crazy. Sometimes because it's always like I always have something to prove, always, and still today, to this day.
Well, that's what's for sure made you a success, a huge success, and just having that motivation, having that drive, and I want to get into the nitty gritty of how it all started and your and your business today, which has done incredibly well. But I also want to ask, going back and before we get there, what is it that keeps that chip on your shoulder, the resiliency? Do you think that's something that, you know, you don't want to let go of? Maybe you do, or is that what is keeping you going and keeping you and creating more success?
Before I answer that, I'm reminded of an interesting quote I saw a while ago. I don't remember where I said it. It was on social media or somewhere I saw it. It's sort of like every time I feel like I want to slow down, I remember I have a lot of motherfuckers to prove wrong. Look, I think part of it is just, where I started and where I've come to. It's interesting. I feel like I have this saying, I call it the immigrant mentality. My family came here as immigrants, and I'm an immigrant. I wasn't born in this country. And I remember growing up and not having a lot, and even starting my career, and money being tight and all those kinds of things. And so I feel like in the back of my mind, there's always a feeling, no matter how much success I achieve, that I could lose it all tomorrow. And so I'm going to keep going and keep building because I never want to be in that position. Right. So there's always this, like, in the back of my mind, I remember where I was, and I just want to get as far away from there as possible. And the goalpost keeps moving, quite frankly, because my goalposts today are not what the goalposts were 5 years ago, or certainly not 10 years ago. And I was pretty successful 5 years ago too, right? But those goalposts kind of keep moving for me, and I think that in and of itself is a real sort of um, not secret, but that is part of the recipe, I think, to a degree, right? The goalpost one day many years ago was 80 grand a year, right? That basically just covers one kid's private school, right? So
Tell me about it.
right, I know you know.
I'm so so. So let's talk about your career. So obviously, you grow up in this type of environment. As you said, there was this part of you that was really about, I want better. I want more for myself. I don't want to be poor. So how did you start? What was the first thing? How did you get out there in terms of the beginning of your career? What were you doing?
So I have a very non-traditional story. I don't really have a traditional track. It kind of came back on track, but there's a few sort of things that were really, really important, I think, critical pieces to my success. So first off, I dropped out of college my first semester for financial reasons. We were having, my family was struggling financially. I wanted to go out and work. I needed to go out to work, and I wanted to, and I just didn't want to wait anymore. I wanted to go make money. And I went into sales. One thing led to another, and this is way back when. This is like the mid 90s. I became a stockbroker. Like this no name firm. I don't even remember the name of the firm anymore, but I was a stockbroker, and it was one of those things where I was sitting in the bullpen of this brokerage firm. This is before the internet. This is before cell phones. I don't even remember. Maybe there was this bulletin board that was literally right behind my cube, where every month they would post what the top guys in the firm would gross, right? And so these guys are grossing 150, 160 grand a month. Right now, they're not keeping all of it, but whatever. This is more money. I think 80 grand a year, I'd be set for life. Now I'm looking at these guys grossing 150 grand a month, and it's unimaginable money. And what also happened was one of those top guys, his office happened to also be in front of my cube, right? And so, it was an interesting thing because he was, better looking than me. He was more educated. He had contacts. I had nothing, right? And the one thing that I realized, and this is back in the day, the way that we would get clients is we would cold call. You got a stack of like Dun and Bradstreet cards, and you're just fucking cold calling. You're making 300 to 500 calls a day, literally. Um, and I realized, that I needed to find an advantage for myself. And I didn't have education. I didn't have a network. But what I did have, the one thing that I could do is I could work. I could work harder than anybody else. So I used to come into the office at 8 a.m. I wouldn't leave until midnight because the law was you could call people until 9 p.m., which means I could go back in time by going across the country or at Chicago, eventually LA, whatever. I worked Saturdays and Sundays, and I started to rise like reasonably quickly. Not overnight, but it took some time, but I started to rise. So much so that somehow, and I don't know how this happened, but somehow Morgan Stanley got a hold of my name and reached out to me to recruit me. Um, and so this is back when this is like the late 90s. I was dating my wife. She wasn't my wife, she's my girlfriend. Um, I went on like 3 rounds of interviews at Morgan Stanley. They gave me the job. I came home, I was so excited. I was like, I'm gonna be fucking working at Morgan Stanley, right? And and they had me fill out this employment app because they remember they called me. I didn't send them a resume, right? So they called me a couple of days later. They're like, hey, you didn't put down where you went to college. And I was like, well, because I didn't go to college. Right. So like, okay. And they're like, they brought me back in for another 3 rounds of interviews. And eventually the head guy in the office, he's like, I like you. I'm going to give you a shot. Right. So now I get a job at Morgan Stanley. I'm sitting in the bullpen. But forget college degree. Everybody around me's got a graduate degree. The guy in front of me is an orthodontist. He's an MD, right? I'm sitting here. These guys have, and they're not cold calling anymore. These guys, it was very different when I got there. They're leaning on their alumni networks, country club memberships, family condo, whatever. Just a completely different way of selling. I still didn't have any of that, right? So all I could do was the same thing I was doing before, which is cold calling. Now, 2 things happened. Um, First off, I realized I'm at Morgan Stanley now. I've got some real name recognition. And one of the problems with cold calling back in the day was, you had this stack of Dun and Bradstreet cards. The reason you had to make 300 to 500 calls a day was because you don't know if that person's qualified. I could be calling the waiter at your local bar. I could be calling a Jeff Bezos. I have no idea, right? Like who the guy is. And the other issue is that a lot of time you don't get through because the people will just hear you and they'll be like, I don't know who the fuck is this guy. You just hang up. So you need to make those, 300 to 500 a day to get, the numbers were like 300 to 500 a day. You get 15 leads a week, and that leads to like 2 or 3 accounts a month. That's rough math. What I realized was now I'm at Morgan Stanley, and we have lists of people that we've lost money for that have left us. Now they're at Payne Weber, Smith Barney, whatever. But they're qualified. Like I can look and see, hey, this guy had 10 million bucks with us. Hey, this guy had 20 million bucks with us, right? And yeah, we lost money and they may fucking hate us. But at least now I have a list of people that I can call that are 100%. My hit rate for qualification now is 100%. And by the way, what I realized as I was calling these people was, wait a second, now they had an account with us. So when I call them and they know who Morgan Stanley is, right? So they're going to hang up right away because they're going to be like, wait, do I still have money? They're like, wait, why are you calling me? Like, you right? So I get that extra little bit, right, of getting my foot in the door. And so I became the guy that revived dead accounts in that office. I was, I finished my first 6 months ranked top 5 in the country. I finished my first year ranked top 10 in the country. Um, and it was actually funny because the first month, that guy that hired me, that gave me the shot, he called me into his office after the first month, and he said, "We have a problem." And I said, "What's the problem?" And he used to have these cards that we would swipe into the office with, so they know when you're there, when you're not. He says, "Well, we see your swipes. You're here on Saturdays and Sundays." He's like, "What are you doing here?" I'm like, "I'm fucking working." How come nobody else
Working.
like, really? I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah. He's like, right, we'll see where this goes. So that was that. And I did reasonably well, but to be perfectly honest with you, I hated what I was doing. Truthfully, I was basically a salesman. Some analyst downstairs told me go buy Microsoft. I buy Microsoft. It's down. I lose my clients 100 grand, more money than I ever thought I'd have in my life. And I have no control. I know nothing. It was actually interesting because some of my clients, I had one really eye-opening experience. I had a client that was in the real estate business. I was doing well for him. I don't remember the math of the numbers, but he had a couple of million bucks with me. And called him one day and I knew he had a lot more money. And I said to him, like, how come you don't give me more money? Like, I'm doing really well for you. And he stopped and he said to me, he said, Matt, he said, this is my fun money. This is my play money. Like my real money's in real estate. Like I don't use this to make money. And that's when I woke up and I realized I'm like, fuck, I'm the casino. I'm not even like, I'm not really, like I don't want to knock financial advisors, but what I was doing was not really, was not fulfilling. It wasn't like, it wasn't going to get me where I wanted to go. I realized in that moment. And that was my first sort of entree into like, oh, what's this real estate? What does this guy do? What's this real estate business that he's talking? Because I had no exposure to that. We didn't know anybody that owned real. We didn't know anybody that owned their own apartment. Forget buildings, right? Like that was it.
I want to get into the real estate. It's just really funny because I started the same way. So I started at Lehman Brothers, which they all were the same. So when you're talking about this and going back, there's so many people, millennials, that they don't remember. You get handed the stack of cards. I was very similar in terms of I really had nothing to offer except just cold call after cold call. And I hated it too. And I would always read about people working in sports and entertainment. This is where I made my mistake. And probably made the better move. So I was like, I got to work in sports because life's too short. And, but it's really funny because when you bring up that work ethic and the ability to cold call, it's really I relate so much to your story. And I love the fact you realize like it sounds like, hey, this sucks because I'd be pitching McDonald's or whatever, and you pitch to some family or couple in Iowa and you could lose them. You're going off what your analyst says, who no analyst knows anything, which we learn. It's just what it is. It's really cool to relate on that way. But for you, you understood that, you know, what did you do at that point? What started changing in you? And how did you eventually, I assume, change your fields?
So I will tell you this, it relates to something that's an important, I think, mantra. Picking the right partner, the right life partner. That choice is going to be responsible for 97% of your either happiness or misery. And at the time, I was dating somebody who ended up being my wife, and we were getting very serious, and I wanted to get married to her. And she basically said to me, she came to me, and she knew I was miserable doing what I was doing, and she came to me, and she was actually about to start law school. And she came to me and she said, look, she said, I don't think we can ever get married because you don't have a college degree. And I know you're going to be successful one day, but I don't want our kids to be like, you see, dad didn't have to go to college. Why should we have to go? I mean, it sounds ridiculous right now, but that actually did happen. And that was really all I needed, honestly. Sometimes you just need a little push, because I fucking hated what I was doing anyway. Right. But the problem is, and there's another say, I have a lot of sayings I like it, I was making money and I was getting a decent salary now. I was making more than the 80 grand. I wasn't making anywhere near but I was making more than the 80 grand that I thought one day was my ceiling. And the problem is that, there's a saying, it's called a salary is the drug they pay you to forget your dreams. Right. So I was kind of reasonably comfortable as a relatively single guy making that money. Right. And that was all I needed to hear from her. And it was enough for me to quit. I resigned from Morgan Stanley. I went back to school. I went to NYU. I ended up going to Stern and I finished, because now it was 7 years later. I wasn't going for girls or frats or parties. I literally doubled up and I finished in 2 years with almost a 4.0. And part of that was I was still living in South Brooklyn, which back then, I don't know, I haven't taken the train in a long time, but like the trains didn't used to run as well at night, right? So like 2 days a week, I would sleep at Bobst at the library because by the time my classes ended and I took the train and got back home, it'd be enough time to shit shower, whatever, and then have to go back, right? So 2 days a week, I slept at Bobst. I did that for 2 years, and I got my BS from Stern, and then I got a job in real estate finance, and that was really my entry into the business. That was my sort of exit, but it was a credit to my girlfriend, who's now my wife, who said to me, she gave me the motivation to say to me, like, look, like, this isn't going to work if you don't make a change.
Well, she sounds like an incredible, beautiful woman. And
What a,
well, I am going to give her all the credit in the world because I know she's going to be listening to this one day. And I do know her. So just for audience, and I will say though, she is a driver and I can see it. And I could see how she got your ass in gear. But I give you so much credit for going back to school, for doing that at that age. It's a very difficult thing when you see all these 20-year-olds, there to party, to have fun. And you're really there just to get this degree so you can go do whatever when only because other people will accept you. When at that time you had it deep inside of you, regardless, you were going to be successful. But it sounds like it really did help you and it did help you get to that next point.
so it was interesting. First off, I felt like I needed the degree to be able to pivot and to be able to have some kind of a stamp of approval that says, hey, this guy is qualified to pivot. I also ended up, after that, I ended up getting my MBA from Columbia Business School as well. And it was because I wanted to get into development and I wanted to raise outside capital. And I just felt like that stamp of approval was important. But really, some things happened, that really pushed that forward for me even more. When I was in school, I wasn't yet sure. I didn't know yet that I wanted to be a real estate developer. I knew I wanted to do something in real estate or finance, but different than what I was doing. And I ended up going through like the normal recruiting process that normal college kids go through, right? And by the way, I was at Stern. I had almost a 4.0. I don't remember. It was like a 3.98. Like I was top of the class. And I had years of experience, which theoretically should help me. So I was going for all these analyst positions, and I remember no one wanted to hire. And I would get interviews at every place: Goldman, Lazard, Deutsche, like you name the top firm, I interviewed there. I had a stack of like rejections, like this, none of them would hire me is because I'm interviewing now with analysts that are 22 years old, and I'm now 27, 28. How old was that? Something like that. I don't know, whatever. I'm substantially older, right? So nobody would give me that job. So I came back after that. I was like, fuck. I need to catch up. I need to get my MBA now so that I can so I can have that qualification and catch up to everybody. That ended up not being what I ended up doing. Truthfully, the way life sometimes I think, gives you opportunities, puts opportunities at your doorstep, and it's really on you to like grab those opportunities. And again, I happened to have a wife at the time who was very good at helping me seize those. We When I was finishing my bachelor's degree, we went on vacation. We were on a plane on the way home from vacation, and we were sitting in economy class. I was sitting in the window seat. My wife was in the middle seat, and this family, got displaced or whatever, and these two people had to give up their seats and move. And the wife sat next to my wife. The husband sat in the other aisle seat. The husband and me both went to sleep. Our wives were talking, and when I landed, I had a job that, that ended up being my mentor in the real estate business.
Amazing.
He was a guy that did real estate financing. It took about 3 months, but 3 months later, I was working for him, and I spent close to 4 years working for him. And I got to do about $2 billion. I ended up being his right hand guy, and I did a couple of $1 billion of debt and equity financing for real estate developers like me. Right, this was before I was a developer. I was a broker, essentially. I was still a broker now, but a little bit different now. It was almost, it wasn't really like an investment banker, but I was a broker helping guys finance their projects, essentially, right? It was a lot different. I wasn't really selling the product. I was actually providing a real service. And it helped me understand how deals got structured, how deals got capitalized. And it gave me an entree and access to where the money was in real estate, quite frankly. Um, and that was really the bedrock of what allowed me to start my business. I did that for about 4 years. I built a tremendous amount of connections and know-how about the capital markets. And 4 years later, I went off, found a partner who had a balance sheet because I didn't have a balance sheet, and we started a company. And we were together for about 15 years. We did about $2 billion of development, or 1.8 billion of development together. He retired 5 years ago, and I rebranded the company, and now we're We've got another $2 billion in our pipeline right now. We're building like 3,600 apartments between New York and Miami. So
Well, I didn't know how much your lovely wife actually is part of the entire story. I know her as a person and how incredible she is, but now you're putting it all out on the line here. Now I get the picture.
I said 97% of your misery.
She is amazing. But tell me about it. Let's talk about Baron Property Group because I really get the feeling, and I've known you for a number of years, but I've seen maybe in the last 5 years or so, just in terms of maybe what is the transition from your former partner leaving the business and you going out specifically on your own, rebranding, and I've seen incredible success. What has been the key to that? A lot of people tell me you have to take a lot of risk in real estate, and I don't know real estate. But, other people tell me that, there's different things that you need to do to be successful. What is it that has made you so successful or that's made Baron Property Group so successful in such a short period of time?
Well, look, I mean, part of it is we were able to leverage our track record from all the years of the previous company when it was Simon Barron. So it wasn't really like a new company, quite frankly. In fairness, we have had a lot of success quickly, but it was sort of built on a foundation, that we built for 15 years before that. Definitely what you said, there's no risk, no reward, right? No guts, no glory, right? So there's definitely an element of risk to what we do. Truthfully, I think what it really is, we've spent a lot of years building our reputation and building the right relationships. And I think I learned this, I have a lot of stories back from the brokerage days. And there's a great story. There's a great story. This is right before I resigned. This is, I think it was March 2020, not 2020, March 2000. The dot-com bubble burst. Okay. This is right before I left Morgan Stanley. So the dot-com bubble burst in March of 2000, I think it was. And I remember, I mean, millions and millions of dollars was lost, right? Like that was across the board. The markets were collapsing. And I remember I was sitting at Morgan Stanley. I was sitting in the cubes. Phones are ringing off the hook. Nobody wants to answer them. Why? Because you have pissed off fucking clients. And why are my stocks dropping to zero, right? Um, and I was answering all the phones. I was answering every one of my clients' calls. Like I was on top of everybody. When I applied to NYU, I got because I didn't have recommendations from I hadn't been in high school for many many years. I got recommendations from three of my clients, two of whom I'd lost millions of dollars for. And it was because I was like I was just there. I just showed up. And I think a lot of people don't realize, like this business, the real estate business, and a lot of businesses, truthfully, I think are built on relationships and on how you conduct yourself. And I think if you can if you can conduct yourself appropriately and build, the right types of relationships with people, be forthright and admit when you're wrong and sort of, be reasonably humble, I think you can go a long way. And I think one of the things that we've been able to do over the last 20 years is we built a pretty great reputation out there. We've done a lot of deals. We've had a lot of success. We've had a couple of deals that haven't worked out, quite frankly. We have. We've given back a building. Like we've had some misses. But I think it's how we carried ourselves. It's easy to behave well when things are going well, right? It's easy when the money's flying and everything's going great. You see what somebody is made of when things are not going so well. And I think, and and truthfully, like I don't want to tie too much of this together, but when you think back, you understand this if you have done the cold calling. When you call 300 people a day, and you have 300 people a day hang up on you and tell you to go fuck yourself, you develop a very, very thick skin. And failure just doesn't have the same meaning as it does. And you learn and you sort of it sort of helps you to get your mind to a place where you think about failure very, very differently. And I think that is a big, big secret is that in order to be successful, you have to fail. You have to fail repeatedly, repeatedly. And there's so many examples of that, especially when you talk about sports, right? The guys in the Baseball Hall of Fame struck out 70% of the time, right? Those guys in the Hall of Fame.
300,
Right.
3 out of 10.
Right. 3 out of 10. They're in the Hall of fucking Fame. Right. So you look at examples like that, and the truth is that most people, the reason I think most people don't really achieve great success is most people give up before they get there. They have a failure, they allow that to hold them back and not, push through it. And I think that's one of the keys, frankly, to our success.
Yeah, some great points. I have this quote that I love, and it's a winner is just a loser who tried one more time. And, I sit there and I stare at that. And also I relate to the fact, like you said, I hated the stockbroker world, cold calling, but I learned, it gave me thick skin and I learned how to handle rejection
Well,
consistently.
it was consistent failure. It was failure like every day, dozens and hundreds of times. So it was almost like a crash course in failure. Right.
And you look at that and I realize that that's what helped me build, a few businesses. And it was only because of that. And I didn't have that fear. But the thing you said that I think is so important, and it's such a great story too for you, is being there for your clients in the difficult times, being willing to have those conversations with them when things aren't going right. Like, I love the fact that two of the people who gave you those recommendations were people you actually lost money for, because I think that is the hardest thing. And I think that's what clients in all businesses, at least I've been in, like you're saying you're in, they want to know you're there for them. They want to know that you're going to, take care of them, that you actually care. And it seems to me that's really been one of your superpowers, going all the way back, that you've always been there, and knowing you personally too, being there or been there in hard times, not running away and turning that into positives.
Hmm. I think that's true. And that those are the hardest times to do it. That's when it matters the most. It's easy to do it when things are good, right? Those are easy phone calls to make. I think the hard phone calls are the ones that you have to make, and that's what separates the winners from the losers, really.
Before I let you go, I just want to talk about a couple things. You know, First off, everyone's always interested in real estate and in terms of what's happening, what's going on. We live here in New York City, and it's what's these apartments are going for exorbitant amounts, or what it might be. But what trends are you seeing in terms of the real estate industry?
Yeah. So look, I mean, our focus is multifamily rental development, ground up. So we're in the rental business. So we don't do too much. We're not really in the condo business or the for sale business. So I don't follow that I mean, I have some views, but I would say in terms of the rental market, I think in New York City specifically, for a lot of reasons, mostly because of the policies that are put in place, quite frankly, I think that supply is going to continue to stay really, really low. Rents, I mean, there was an article, I think, this morning in The Real Deal that rents again are like at a record rise this year. I don't see rents abating in New York anytime soon. I still see significant rent growth for New York City, only for the reason that there's just not a lot of supply being built. And the programs that have been put in place to help spur rental development, quite frankly, don't make a lot of financial sense as a rental developer. So there's really not, I don't see anything coming down the pike that's going to alleviate the supply. There was a statistic a year or two ago. There's something that, the city needs something like 800,000 apartments to be created in order to alleviate sort of the housing crisis. And I think we're building a fraction of that every single year. So I don't see that changing anytime soon. We're also pretty active in Miami, and the stuff that we're building it tends to be middle class housing, workforce housing. We're not building like ultra luxury. There, we're kind of seeing the same thing. There's a little more supply coming in there than in New York because it's more development friendly, quite frankly. But that being said, there's a lot of net migration coming into Miami. And what's ending up happening is a lot of that migration's happening sort of at the higher income bands, and it's pushing people, sort of down. Like it's creating, it's making it more challenging to afford to live in certain places that were historically affordable, and it's sort of pushing people out. So that I think is helpful to the kind of stuff that we're doing, frankly. I don't think it's going to result in the same growth rates that we're going to see in New York because New York just has an artificial supply cap. But nevertheless, again, we're still in an inflationary environment. That tends to be pretty good for real estate. So I think the wins, and it does seem like we'll see what happens with these tariffs, but it does seem like we're heading into a lower rate environment, over generally speaking, over the next year or 18 months. So I think all those things are good, like tailwinds for real estate in general.
Yeah. What's the most exciting thing for you right now with Baron Property Group, just in terms of projects or even in terms of, your day to day, what you're really enjoying? What's keeping you excited? Because I could tell you've got the energy and, even being beaten down by your kids and yeah, and all of that stuff, you still got that energy. So what is it right now that you're most excited about?
We're finishing a 560 unit building right now in Miami in the next couple of months. That's pretty exciting. And we're going to start construction literally next door on another 640 unit building in February. We're starting construction on a 50-story, 560 unit building here in Long Island City, where we've done a lot of work. It's just really exciting to like build the portfolio and see these things kind of come to fruition because these are long. It takes years for us to, some of these deals, like this deal that's going to be finished, which it's still going to take us a year to lease it up, but the building that's going to be finished in a couple of months, we started that deal 3.5 years ago. So it's just being able to see these things to fruition and watching them just turn from a pile of dirt into a, large structure. It's just a really interesting and satisfying thing.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. And knowing it's going to be there, and for decades, hopefully, right? And just that's something that you've created and built. And, I love, being here in New York and seeing what's happening in Long Island City and just, it's incredible, really, when you see the growth there. Last thing before I let you go, there's a lot of young Matt Barons out there nowadays, I'm sure, seeing what's happened in real estate and just in terms of wanting opportunity. If you were to give some advice, let's say, to someone starting out right now in real estate or just starting out in general, looking back on everything that you've done and how you've become successful, what advice would you give that person?
So it's actually interesting. I'm actually working on a book right now as we speak, and it has to do with some of these types of topics. And the one thing that's in there that I think is sort of a theme, I'm a big believer you got to burn the boats. If you have something that you want to do, whether it be real estate or podcasting or whatever the hell it is that you want to do, there's a lot of people out there. I was giving a speech. I think it was to NYU. I speak at a lot of these like school things like NYU and some other universities. And I was doing a speech.
It's funny, they wouldn't let you in years ago. Now they want you speaking there.
So I was giving a speech, and this one kid raised his hand, and he kind of said to me, oh, actually, it wasn't NYU. It was a university in Miami. They have like an LLM program for their JDs, right? And this one kid raised his hand. And he said, I've got this great job from Greenberg Traurig as an attorney that I'm going to start when I graduate in a couple of months. He's like, but I really want to be a real estate developer. And he's like, thinking maybe I'll just do that on the side while I have my job. And I looked at him and I said, look, I said, I don't know you well enough to like give you advice like that. But to me, I'm a big believer that if you're not all in, if you don't burn the ships, if you've got a plan B, and especially if that plan B is sort of like a quote unquote easy way out, you're going to end up defaulting to that when times get hard. Because the truth of the matter is anything that you want to do, again, whether it's being a real estate developer, doing podcasts, well, whatever, it's going to be hard, especially at the beginning. And you're probably going to fail. And people are probably going to tell you suck. And you probably will suck. and, and, and the only way that you're going to get better is by pushing through that. And the problem is if you have a plan B that's comfortable and where you're making money, especially being going to make a lot of money, like how hard is it? Like, oh shit, this deal didn't work out. You know what? I'm still making a lot of money. Let's not worry about it. Let's go out. You want to go have dinner? Let's go have dinner. Right? Like it's just, that whole idea about burning the ships, when you think about where that comes from, imagine you land on an island with your crew and you've got the natives there and like they want to kill you and they want to fucking eat you. And if the ships are still there, your crew's going to get scared and escape. But if the ship, you burn that ship down, you have no choice. There's actually, I read this book. I try to read this book once a year, The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And one of the things in there is literally do not attack an army that has its back against the wall, right? Because they're going to fight to the death because you have no choice. So I think that if you really want to be successful, you got to put yourself in the position where you have no choice but to be successful. You have no other way out.
I love that. And I love ending on that because to me, as you said, burn the boats and, is never, it's become popular lately. My side hustle, this side hustle, it's very difficult when you have all these things, but if you focus on this one thing, you burn the boats, you're there. It's your back's against the wall, just like you're saying in Art of War. And that's what's going to prove you to be successful or fail.
You're going to
And
find a way. You're going to find a fucking way.
you do. We'll end it there because I love that quote. And thank you so much for coming on, Matt. It really, truly coming from, I love doing podcasts with people who have really what you call been self-made, have come from not a lot, not meaning in terms of family and love, but in terms of just opportunity. Because you see in this world where people are handed opportunities, given opportunities. I love entrepreneurs that starting like with the cold calling, figuring things out, seeing your dad, remembering that memory, not wanting to be there. To me, that's inspiring. That's how you innovate. So I really appreciate you coming on and being so authentic and telling your story and wish you nothing but more success. You're killing it. And, hopefully you save me one of those little apartments in Miami. My wife throws me out and I can head down there. So anyway, though, appreciate your time. Best of luck.
My pleasure.
It's the best.
Thanks so much.